Hello, my name is Roy Mathena, and I am the Chief Instructor for PSI Project Management. The video today is on the 10x5x49. The 10x5x49 is made up in the 6th edition of the PMBOK Guide, or the Project Management Body of Knowledge, which is produced by the Project Management Institute, and the published date was 2017. I want you to notice, first of all, that we have 5 different process groups. We have initiating, we have planning, we have executing, we have monitoring, controlling, and then we have closing. We also have 10 knowledge areas: integration, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resources, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder. We have internal to this framework 49 different processes. We use these processes in our project to help us accomplish the objectives of the project. Now, integration management knowledge area is the macro level. All of the processes flow up into integration, into develop project management plan, into develop or direct and manage project work, into monitor and control project work, and so forth. All of these processes flow up into that, and we will be demonstrating that over the video as you view it. Now, we use this framework, first of all, to create our methodology. How are we going to manage projects? We will identify those knowledge areas and those processes that fit the needs of our organization, and we will set up then our project management methodology, how we're going to manage projects. This methodology is going to be flexible enough that we can modify the methodology as needed for the specific projects that we are working on. For example, we may need to tailor this methodology to fit the needs of a specific project. For example, I have a project where I'm not going to be procuring anything. So if I'm not going to be procuring anything, I will tailor this 10x5x49, and I will not include in it anything with regards to plan procurement management, conduct procurement, or control procurement. Another aspect of that is tailoring the processes specifically to meet the needs of the project. Let's say, for example, that I'm going to be procuring human resources to help with the project only, nothing else, just human resources. Then I could tailor the plan procurement management, conduct procurement, and control procurement to fit the needs of what I will actually be procuring. Now, when I look at this 10x5x49, I look at it as the project manager's toolkit. Now, I'm a licensed A&P mechanic, and I used to work on airplanes, all kinds of airplanes, little ones, jumbos, helicopters. And I had this huge toolbox full of hundreds of tools. So when I had an airplane that I was working on, I would roll that toolbox out to the airplane, and I would take out of that toolbox the tools that I needed to work on that airplane. Once I finished that airplane, I'd put the tools back in it, roll that box to the next airplane, and I'd pull out of that toolbox the tools I needed to work on that next airplane. You see, I did not use those hundreds of tools on every job, on every aircraft. I used only what I needed. Well, as a project manager's toolkit, this falls into that same category. I only use those knowledge areas and those processes that I need specifically for my project management methodology and specifically for the project that I am working on. So as we go through this video, you will see those relationships and get a better understanding of what I'm talking about. The review of the 10x5x49. Everything we do is interacting and interrelated. The process groups are all done in parallel. In other words, I might do some initiating, I might do some planning, I might do some executing, some monitoring, controlling, and some closing, all at the same time. So now when we talk about the knowledge areas, that holds true with them as well. For example, I'm not going to start off with integration and then go to scope and then go to schedule and then go to cost and then go to quality and resource management and so forth. I'm not going to do that. There is some alignment here and things that you have to do in sequence, but those are normally within the knowledge area itself, and it's not the knowledge areas that have to be done in sequence, nor is it the process groups that have to be done in sequence. So we start off with the project charter. So the project charter kicks off the project. That says I have a project. Now once we have that project charter written, which will contain things like a brief description of the project, a brief description of the deliverable. It may have milestones in it. It may have some constraints in it, such as a budgetary constraint. It may have a time constraint. It may have some risk identified. It may have some stakeholders identified. Those types of things would be in the project charter itself. So now we have the project charter, so now we're ready to start our project. So when we're starting a project, we're going to have a lot of things going on at the same time. Number one, I'm going to start going to my organizational process assets, and I'm going to pull from those OPA the actual templates of the documents that I have created and stored in my OPA, and I'm going to pull out my templates for my subsidiary project management plans, and I'm going to start modifying those. Now those subsidiary plans that I would create and put in the OPA would be, for example, my scope management plan, which is an output of plan scope management. My schedule management plan, which is an output of plan schedule management. Now, it's also an output of scope management would be the requirements management plan. So there are actually two plans output here, the scope and requirements management plan. Then we take out of that our cost management plan. That would come out of our library also. Our plan quality management. Now, our quality management plan, we want to start very early in the project. We want to consider quality right up here at the project charter level, because quality is going to drive everything else in my project. For example, it will drive the scope, it will drive the schedule, it will drive the resources, the cost, any number of the things that we see here. Quality will drive it. So at the project charter level, we have to have a good understanding of what quality is going to be for this project. Now, yes, we will add to it. We will add to it as we go through all the planning processes, but we need that understanding right at the onset of the project. So we'll also pull out our resource management plan. We'll then pull out our communications management plan. Now, these plans will have to be modified considerably for the project, but we can at least start off with a template that would have a lot of the generic information in it. The plan risk management. Again, this is going to be primarily generic, but it does have some project-specific information in it as well. And then we will have our procurement management plan, and then we would have our stakeholder engagement plan. Those will be primarily the templates that would be modified for the actual project you're working on. Now, every one of these plans, every one of them, is going to flow up, and they're going to flow into Develop Project Management Plan. In Develop Project Management Plan, we create one project management plan that has 19 subsidiary components. So now, at the same time that we are doing this generic creation of the project management plans, we're also going to be doing some other things as well. For example, after I have my project charter, I said I'm going to start developing my project management plan right here. And I'm also going to start identifying stakeholders right down here. There's identify stakeholders. So now, as I'm identifying stakeholders, I'm going to start analyzing those stakeholders and understanding those stakeholders, understanding their interest in the project, their impact on the project, and I'm going to develop a stakeholder engagement plan for them. I'm going to start working on that as I identify stakeholders. So here we have planned stakeholder engagement. I am also going to start planning communications for those stakeholders at the same time that I'm identifying stakeholders. I'll get to understand what their communication requirements will be, and I'll be able to start addressing those communication requirements. So I'm also going to start collecting requirements up here. Requirements are what drive the project. That's the foundation to the scope of the project. So I'm going to start collecting the requirements from the stakeholders as I am identifying stakeholders. Now, will I be finished with these items? Will I be finished with my collect requirements, my stakeholder requirements, or my requirements documentation? Will I be finished with my communications management plan? Will I be finished with my stakeholder engagement plan? No. This is my initial focus on those subsidiary plans. But I'm going to use my time efficiently, and I'm going to work efficiently so that I can really get this project kicked off the quickest possible. So now you can see I'm balancing all these balls in the air at the same time. Let's look at some of the other things. All right, so now as I am doing that, I remember I said I have my plan now pretty well, my generic plan pretty well set up. Given that plan, I'm now going to start working on the scope. When I was working on the scope, then I already have my scope management plan. Remember, we've already done that. So you have to have the plan before you can start doing the work. So I'm now going to start collecting requirements from the stakeholder. This is a focused effort. It's beyond what requirements I have identified when I identified the stakeholders. This is beyond that. This is a focused effort now to collect the requirements for the project. So the requirements will be justified. What justifies that requirement? What need does it satisfy? What need is expected? What need needs to be met? And how will this requirement address that need? We have collected the requirements. So once we have collected the requirements, then we will define the scope. So the project manager, along with the project team, takes these requirements and we rewrite them into the scope statement. The scope statement is the output of defined scope. This scope statement is a comprehensive text document. It's a document that will contain the details about the project and the details about the deliverables. It could be deliverable or it could be deliverables, whatever it might be. It's going to have things like milestones in it, perhaps carried forward from your project charter. It's going to have a detailed description of the deliverable. It may have some exclusions in it. This project does not include, for example. It may have some risk. It may have some constraints in it, such as was in the project charter. But it's a comprehensive text document. So this comprehensive text document is developed by the team, by the project manager, and it gives us a broader understanding about this project and what it's all about. It helps team building. We want our team to take ownership of this project, and this is one of the ways that we can get them involved to a greater depth in the project itself. So after we have that scope statement written, then we can create WBS. Create WBS. Now notice, these things have to be done in order. You got to collect requirements before you can do the scope statement. You've got to do the scope statement before you can create the WBS. So within the confines of these knowledge areas, there are some processes that we have to do in order. So we have our Create WBS. Well, the Create WBS is where we take the scope statement and we decompose it down into the work breakdown structure. We'll have branches in our work breakdown structure of things that need to be done. We'll have control accounts. We'll have different things associated with that work breakdown structure. However, the lowest part of the breakdown structure is the WBS work package. A WBS work package is small enough that it can be managed. It's small enough that it can be estimated for time and cost. And it's small enough that a person or a group of people can execute that work package. You see, we execute work packages to create the deliverable. As a project manager, you will manage at the work package level. All right, so now I have created my WBS. I have assigned index numbers to the branches and to the work packages. I have a title. I might have some, I'm now going to start working on some duration estimates, and then later I'll work on some cost estimates for those work packages. But I might have also, and I should have also, a companion document to the WBS, which is called the WBS Dictionary. The WBS Dictionary contains all of the details about that work package. It may have the name, should have the name of the person assigned to do the work or the group, a detailed description of the work for that work package. It may have activities in it and other supporting information such as perhaps agreements if you're outsourcing parts of it, things like that, maybe some technical data. Whatever's necessary would also be a part of that WBS dictionary. So it does contain all the details for the work package itself. So now what I do is I combine the scope statement, the WBS, and the WBS dictionary, and I create my scope baseline. My scope baseline is project specific, and it flows as an input into developed project management plan, where it becomes a part of the project management plan. Now, as I'm going through this process here, I might identify some more stakeholders. If I do, I'll add them to the stakeholder register. Whatever I learn in this through progressive elaboration I will update other documents and other plans to reflect that new knowledge. Progressive elaboration is a very important tool that we use in project management. All right, so now I have my scope baseline. I also have my schedule management plan, which we assembled earlier. Now what I'm going to do is to take the WBS out of that scope baseline. It's going to be an input into define activities, and I'm going to decompose those activities down into an activity list. Now, my WBS dictionary may have the activities listed for that work package. If so, all I do is I extract them out of that, put them into the activity list, so that I can start planning in more detail the duration estimates and the cost estimates. So I define activities, create the activity list. Now that activity list is going to be used to sequence activities. It's going to be used to estimate activity durations. It's also going to be used to estimate costs down here. Now I have my activity list. I can sequence those activities next if I want to. So sequence the activities. So I sequence the activities. I put them in the order in which they will be performed. Remember, that activity list is not in any order. It's in random order. And so now I'm going to put order to those activities. The dependencies. Remember the dependencies. We have a hard logic or mandatory. We have soft logic or discretionary. And we have external dependencies. So once I have the project network diagram, which is an output of sequence activities, I know the order now in which my project will be executed. Now I need to estimate activity durations. I can do that before I sequence activities, or I can do it after. It does not matter. But I have to do both of them before I can develop schedule. I estimate activity durations. When I estimate activity durations, I'm going to do that in conjunction with estimate activity resources. Right here. Normally, I will do these two together, but if I don't do them together, I have to estimate activity resources before I estimate activity durations. Normally, I do them together. I might do some what-if analysis when I'm estimating activity durations. What-if analysis would include, for example, what if I use 2 paint crews instead of 1? What if I use 2 carpenter crews instead of 1? Or 4 database programmers instead of 3? Or if I use 1 database programmer rather than 2. In our projects, we need to understand what our constraints are. What are the constraints? Are we a cost-constrained project, or are we a schedule-constrained project? If we are a schedule-constrained project, we may add more resources and not worry too much about the cost. So that means add more resources to get it done quicker. If we are a cost-constrained project, then we may keep the resources lower and extend the schedule out. So those are the things that we have to understand as we are estimating activity durations. So the duration estimates would be the amount of time that it will take us to complete each activity. Before I can do my schedule, develop schedule, I have to know what. So what would come from activities? Define activities gives us the activity list. That is what. I have to know when. When we sequence activities, we develop the project network diagram that tells us when. I also have to know how long. When I estimate activity durations, I know how long. Those three things are combined into the project schedule to give me two things. My schedule baseline. The schedule baseline flows as an input into develop project management plan, and it is combined with the project management plan. And it also gives me a document which is called project schedule. The project schedule is made up of three different types of schedules: the Gantt chart, the milestone chart, and the project network diagram. Of course, senior management would typically want to see the milestone chart. Functional managers and maybe the team and project manager would want the Gantt chart. But certainly the project manager and the project team want the project network diagram. All right, before we can do cost, we have to have our charter, we have to have our plan, we have to have our scope baseline, and we have to have our schedule baseline. All four of those are critical to the development of the cost. So we take the activity list and the schedule and cost baselines, but our primary input into estimate cost should be our activity list. We will estimate the cost for each activity. Now, we have several different methods that we could use to estimate the cost. We have top-down estimating, which is also known as analogous. We would copy perhaps the cost in from other projects, or even within a branch of this current project we're working on, potentially. And we would use those costs to create our budget or our cost estimates. The other thing that we would use as a tool would be bottom-up estimating. Now, bottom-up estimating is generally the preferred method because it is more accurate. So we start estimating at the activity level, and we aggregate those costs up into the work package for each activity. And then we aggregate the work package cost up into the branch. And then we aggregate the branches up into the project to give us an overall project cost. Now, these same tools are used for schedule and are used for duration estimates, for example. And the same philosophy would apply from an analogous estimating and also for bottom-up estimating. We have another estimating technique that's called three-point estimating. Three-point estimating is where you establish the pessimistic estimate, the optimistic estimate, and the realistic or most likely estimate. It's a triangular would be P plus O plus M divided by 3, and that's triangular. The beta or the PERT would be a weighted average, and that would be P plus O plus 4 times M divided by 6. And that would give you a weighted average for the cost and or the durations. Then, once you have the cost estimates, then you're going to create your budget in the process called determine budget. The budget is time phased to the schedule. So I have to have my schedule, and I will time phase my cost estimates for each activity to the schedule so I know when I will be paying for each activity. The output of determined budget is the cost baseline. That cost baseline flows as an input into develop project management plan, where it is combined with the overall project management plan. Now I have my 3 baselines. I have cost, schedule, and scope baselines. But there's more than that. As we are developing our plan, we will update again to reflect any new information that has been learned, progressive elaboration, as we're going through these processes. Now, plan quality management right here. Remember, we started this early in the project at the project charter level. And as we're going through, we're going to update the quality management plan certainly to reflect that new information. Now remember, we estimated activity resources at the same time we were estimating the activity durations right here. So that's already been done. And once again, as we're going through this process, guess what? Progressive elaboration, we update to reflect that new information. So we have not talked about the communications management plan much. Remember, at the identify stakeholders level, we made a determination on some of the communications that would be done with the stakeholders. Now we're going to have a concerted effort to understand more about the communications. Risk. We start identifying risk right here at the project charter level. We will add to those risks as we are progressing through the planning phases, the planning processes, and we will continuously update that risk register. Now, once we have identified the risk, then we're going to start planning for those risks. For example, I have identified my risk, so now I am going to perform qualitative risk analysis. Remember, qualitative risk analysis is done quickly. It's very subjective. And there are really two types of techniques we might use here. One of them is called a risk assessment. And when we do the risk assessment, we will do the most likely or likely to occur, more likely to occur, and so forth. And we would establish, first of all, the high probability or the probability of occurring. And usually we would do that on a low, medium, and high category. We would also estimate the impact, low, medium, and high. Strictly subjective, it's done very quickly, and it gives us a priority. So it kind of introduces us to the risk, really. So once we have that priority, then we can perform quantitative risk analysis. We can assign dollar figures and we can assign time figures to each individual risk. Now remember, as we do these analysis and updates to the risk register right here, that's the output of identify risk, updates to the risk register will be made. And the risk register has all of the details for each individual risk on the project. Now, once we have done the quantitative analysis, we've added new information to the risk. So we might go back and redo our qualitative analysis again to come up with another number priority on it. Once we have established that priority, then we will plan the risk response. This is the response for each individual risk. Remember, the risk management plan is a high-level plan. It does contain a budgetary number for all risk. But if I want to know the details of a risk, I go to the risk register. Procurement. We talked about planned procurement earlier. Planned procurement is going to give us a lot of information. When will I plan procurement? I may not have procurement at all in my project, and if I don't, I won't use this process. If I have limited procurement, then I may limit it. I may tailor that process to meet the needs of the project. But I might do procurement right up here at the project charter level right after I've done my project charter. I could do procurement anywhere through here. But generally speaking, in a traditional project, I'm not going to do procurement until I have my scope, schedule, cost baselines, and perhaps my resources identified. So I know, number one, what I need to procure. And I have enough details, number two, to be able to procure it, to be able to create my statement of work. Planned procurement management gives us several different things. Number one, we will do our make or buy decision in planned procurement. We will analyze, look at the alternatives, and make a decision on whether we're going to buy something or whether we're going to make it in-house. If I have critical IP type of information that I don't want to release, then that dictates that I will build it in-house. If I don't have the resources to do it, the skill sets to do it, then that would dictate that I had to purchase this outside. So I'm going to look at all these things, look at all the alternatives. Can I buy something off the shelf to satisfy the need? I'll look at all those alternatives in planned procurement. I'll also consider in planned procurement my statement of work. I'll create that. And that will give the sellers enough information that they can make a decision on whether they're going to bid on this contract or not. I may end up having to advertise for sellers. I may have to advertise to find people that would bid on the contract. I have my procurement documents also that are an output of planned procurement. And one of the more important things coming out of planned procurement is my seller selection criteria. Remember, I want to establish how I'm going to select the seller before I even know who the sellers are, the potential bidders. We talked about planned stakeholder engagement early in the project at the time we were identifying stakeholders. And again, we're going to draw on that and build on that stakeholder engagement plan all the way through the project, progressive elaboration. And then we will do a focused effort here to plan stakeholder engagement at some point in time. So now basically I have my plan. I have a project, I have a plan. When I have enough plan to start doing work, then I can start executing the project. Remember, there's no point in time at which I can point to and say I'm done planning. No point. The only point I can say that I'm done planning is when I close the project or the phase. Because progressive elaboration, I'm going to be planning this project throughout the life of it. But I have a plan to work with. So I'm going to start doing work on the project. So now I start off at direct and managed project work, which is an executing process. I'm doing work on the project, the scope, the deliverable, and I'm following the plan and executing the plan itself. Now, as I am doing the work on the project, I am going to manage quality. Manage quality is all about the processes. Is my process being followed? Is my process functioning as intended? I'm going to do quality audits on the processes for deficiencies, for best practices. I'm going to also acquire resources. I have my resource documents. I have my resource estimates, my resource documents. I have my resource management plan, which will contain the roles and responsibilities of the resources. But I'm going to acquire resources. When I acquire resources, I'm acquiring physical resources, and I'm also acquiring human resources. Now, if it's something that I'm procuring, raw materials, let's say, then I'm still going to procure those materials under conduct procurement. That's where I do it. But acquire resources is kind of the driver that says, bring them in. I need them now. Or to stage those resources to where they are needed. Another aspect of acquired resources is the human resources. You see, my resource management plan has roles and responsibilities and categories of resources, but it does not have specifics. So when I acquire resources, I'm going to add names to those roles and responsibilities. I'm adding the specifics to it. And then, of course, I'll update the calendar to reflect when those resources will be working on the project. Early in the project, as soon as I have my team identified and I'm ready to get work, I want to start developing the team. I want to do team building. I want my team of individuals working together as one. So I will start team building. We talked about earlier about when we rewrite or write the scope statement, that's a way to get them involved. When we do the WBS, that's a way to get your team members involved. When you select resources, that's a way. Anything you can do to get your team member involved in the project is going to help them take ownership of the project and help them to work together as a team rather than individuals. You're going to conduct some team building exercises early in the project, but you have to conduct team building exercises throughout the project. We want to do team building initially and then throughout the life of the project so our team is efficient and working together closely. Manage team. So we manage our team to the plan. We make sure they're in alignment with the plan. They're following the plan. This is almost a monitoring controlling process, except we manage people. When we control resources, we are controlling physical resources only. We control physical resources, we manage people. Manage communications. We manage communications, we distribute the communications, we communicate. Now that doesn't mean that you stand up and announce, okay everybody, I am in communications, I'm in managed communications, I can talk to you now. That's not what that means. You're talking to people, you're communicating with people throughout the life of the project. But what you're doing is it's encapsulated underneath this managed communication. So any communications you do would fall underneath that process, regardless of where you do it at. Implement risk response. I have a plan for risk. I have identified that risk. The risk occurs. I implement my risk response, my risk plan. Whenever it occurs, I implement it. Conduct procurement. So I've made a decision in plan procurement on what I'm going to procure. I've described the contract types in plan procurement. So when I contract my procurement, I will first of all distribute the request for quote to the various sellers that are going to quote on this project. I'm going to hold bidder conferences because I want to maintain a level playing field for all of the sellers. I'll call them all in together, Zoom or however I do it, and they will have an opportunity to ask questions. We'll provide some of the boilerplate information to them, the contract expectations and so forth. But everybody hears the same thing at the same time. No private meetings. So I issue the RFQ. I hold the bidder conference. Now I'm going to receive the quotes from the sellers back into conduct procurement. When I receive those quotes, I'm going to evaluate them. I'm going to select the seller. I'm going to negotiate the contract, and I'm going to sign the contract all within control procurement. So potentially that's a big process. Manage stakeholder engagement. I have a stakeholder engagement plan right here. So now I'm going to execute that stakeholder engagement plan. I know the current position of that stakeholder with regards to the project. I know their desired position, and I have a plan to move them from their current position to their desired position. I'm going to execute that plan. All of these executing processes are done under the auspice of direct and managed project work. Managed project knowledge is kind of a different item here. I'm going to do this very early in the project. I'm going to take lessons learned from previous projects, get it out of my OPA, and I'm going to have it as an input here initially. I'm going to review those lessons learned registers and glean from them lessons that might be applicable to this project. All right, so those lessons then will formulate my initial lessons learned register. As I'm going through this project, I am going to learn additional lessons. Regardless of where it may be, I'm going to learn additional lessons. As I learn these lessons, I am going to update my lessons learned register. When I have a deliverable that is delivered, it's going to circle around as an input into managed project knowledge, and I will review that deliverable for lessons learned. Now, when I get to close project or phase, now I'm going to pull the team together and we're going to finalize the lessons learned and file them away for future use. So far we've talked about initiating, planning, executing. So now I have a plan. I'm doing work. So I want to make sure that I'm doing the work in accordance with the plan. So I monitor and control project work. Now I'm going to do this based on the individual knowledge areas. For example, scope. I have my plan, which is my scope baseline, and I'm going to control scope. I'm going to control scope. I look at scope to the actual work being done to make sure that I'm doing it correctly in accordance with the plan. I always have the plan as an input here. I will extract from that plan the plan that is most appropriate for that knowledge area. This would be scope baseline. This would be schedule baseline. This would be cost baseline. This would be the quality management plan. This would be the resource management plan. This would be communications management plan, and on down the line. That's the plan. So now I have to have actual results to be able to compare against the plan. So coming out of direct and managed project work, I have as an output work performance data. So that work performance data is going to flow as an input into control scope. I know how my scope is progressing. That data is now going to flow also into control schedule. I know how my schedule is performing. I know where it stands. I also know how much money I've spent. I also know how many quality defects I have and things of that nature. So this is all actual results or actual information. Work performance data for every area would be an output of direct and managed project work. Now that WPD is unanalyzed. It's just raw data. So what I'm going to do in these processes is I'm going to analyze that data. So I'm going to compare the actual results, the WPD, to the plan, and I'm going to look for variance. For example, control scope. Is there a variance between plan and actual? This would be WPI, work performance information. WPI is going to flow as an input into monitor and control project work. Control schedule. Is there a variance between planned and actual? WPI is going to flow into monitor and control project work. Control cost. Is there a variance in control cost? Again, that will flow into monitor and control project work. So I have as an input WPD, as an output I have WPI from all of these processes. And that WPI is going to be an input into monitor and control project work. And that tells me about variance data. If I have a variance, I have to address that variance. Remember, the variance is based on the thresholds for those different areas, particularly cost, schedule, and scope. So if I have a variance, I have to issue a change request. Now, regardless of where it comes from, change requests are coming out of some of the executing processes. It comes out of some of the planning processes, some of the executing processes. It comes out of some of the monitoring and controlling processes. And it comes out of particularly the identify stakeholder process. Every one of these change requests flows as an input into perform integrated change control. In perform integrated change control, I will analyze those change requests for their impact on the project. I want to know if that scope change is going to affect cost, time, resources, quality, everything. I want to know how it will affect anything and everything in the project. I'll analyze it, and then if that change request is justified, I will approve the change request. So I have a change request going in, we analyze it for its impact on the project, and then approved change request would be an output of perform integrated change control. You may see it referred to as PIC, P-I-C-C. So now that change request, we're going to chase a rabbit for a minute here. That change request is going to flow into three different areas. First of all, it's going to flow as an input into direct and managed project work. In direct and managed project work, that's where I will incorporate that change request into the deliverable. That change request is also going to flow as an input into control quality. I also have the deliverable as an input into control quality. So I will check that deliverable to make sure that change request has been incorporated in it. That change request is going to flow to a third place, that approved change request. It's going to flow into control procurement right here. If I'm procuring something that I had a change on, then I will make sure when I receive that from the seller that the change request has been incorporated. So we've talked about initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling. One other item here that we need to talk about is the deliverable. In direct and managed project work, that's where we work on the deliverable. The deliverable is an output of direct and managed project work. That deliverable flows as an input into control quality. In control quality, I check it against the change request to make sure it's been incorporated, but I check it against the quality requirements for this deliverable, for the project. I make sure that that deliverable meets the quality requirements. If it meets the quality requirements, then I will have an output that is called a verified deliverable. So you have a deliverable in, verified deliverable out. That verified deliverable is then going to flow as an input into validate scope. In validate scope, the customer, the project manager, the project team, sponsor, maybe some other stakeholders are going to be present. You're going to do a point-by-point inspection of that deliverable to make sure all of the scope is present in it. The customer is going to accept that deliverable in validate scope. So on the output side of validate scope, I have an accepted deliverable. That accepted deliverable flows as an input into closed project or phase. And in closed project or phase, that's where I will transfer that deliverable to the client, to the customer, to the organization. All right, so we could have many deliverables. We may have one deliverable. It just depends. That pretty well sums it up. This will give you a basis of how everything flows together in this 10x5x49.